There's a new book out today. It is a whopper by Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman called Regime Change, with new details on Trump's effort to expand his own power as president. It's based on 1,000 interviews with those close to Trump and the president himself. Here's what they told my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell about the lack of restraints on this White House. Watch this.
This is a group of people who genuinely want to see him succeed, Lawrence. I mean, I think that is something that is just so fundamentally different from term one. You have people who were with him through 4 indictments, a number of civil cases, 2 assassination attempts, and him winning overwhelmingly, unlike 2016. And so they believe there is something sort of almost mystical about him, that he can hear frequencies that maybe they can't. And they hate the mainstream media more than they hate things they, see him doing that they have concerns about, many of them anyway. And so you will not hear as much of that. You haven't heard as much of that.
Let's get back to the group chat. Okay, Basil, it is no surprise that people very close to Trump believe he has mystical powers. I mean, look what he's achieved. Look at who he is. Look at what he's done. And look what he's achieved. And for many of those people around him, they can't believe they are in these positions of power. But that doesn't change the fact that only 30% of Americans feel good about him.
Well, he certainly feels good about himself. I mean, he called himself Jesus Christ, right? According to his memes and pictures. Does that translate to the average voter? Look, there are going to be Republicans that will support him no matter what, Republicans that will support other Republicans no matter what. But those independents, Democrats aside, but those independents that supported him because they don't like the Democratic Party, don't like the Republican Party, and they wanted somebody to continue the job in terms of draining the swamp, have they found that in Donald Trump in 2.0? They certainly have not. In fact, what they found is the cozying up to the 0.01% of us, right? And they're looking at their lives get worse as some people's lives get significantly better. And so, to me, it seems oligarchical. And I think the voters have picked up on that already. I think that's already in the electorate right now. So the question is, and just from a political standpoint, how do Democrats talk to those voters, right? Because they're still not loving Democrats, but they're looking at the White House and saying, this guy's not for us. He said he was for us, but he's not really for us.
Yeah, he's cozying up to that 0.001%. But in the book, they've also got Trump shortly after the election mocking Mark Zuckerberg, mocking Jeff Bezos for kissing his booty.
Yeah, no, I mean, he doesn't respect any of that. He respects people who push back on him. That's been my recollection from covering the first term. And
he'll fire you, but he respects you.
That's right, yeah. But to Basil's point, I mean, it's sort of reminding me of the old ads that they would go after Kamala Harris on. She's for they, them.
Yeah, so
he's for us. Right. But you can flip that around on Donald Trump now. The they, them that Donald Trump is for is the oligarchs. I mean, those are the people that he's lifted up, the tech bros that he's lifted up in this economy. And he's not for us, the people at home who are struggling with all these bills that are piling up and the increasing cost of living in this country. The other thing that, I mean, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this next, but the other thing that is pretty damning that comes out of this book goes back to the Iran issue. He was warned repeatedly in those sessions, be careful of going after Iran. This is going to blow up in your face. He proceeded anyway. And it's because of the other revelation that's pointed out in this book. He thinks of himself as a Mao, as a Caesar, as a Napoleon. He sees himself as all powerful. And to your point, Stephanie, yes, he does kind of have a cult around him in that White House these days. There aren't any more John Kellys or James Mattises anymore. They just don't exist. And so it's down to the Kool-Aid drinkers and the next of kin.
But who actually has more power? Because is it the president or is it these tech oligarchs? Because his relationship with these tech giants could end up costing him his base, who were the ride or die voters who put him into power to begin with.
The tech oligarchs
I'm pretty sure Mark Zuckerberg did not go to a Trump rally 1.0, and that's what put Donald Trump in the White House.
Correct, but I think the tech oligarchs are deciding to let Donald Trump be Caesar. There's various segments of society that have failed. Frankly, some would argue the press has failed, the mainstream media, and we have lots of, reflection to do on our own. But one of the amazing anecdotes in the book is Mark Zuckerberg sending the president a picture of a drawing by his elementary school age child, where the child wrote that he looked forward to the golden age of America. Like using your child, you're a multi-billionaire, to impress like Donald Trump. And then Jeff Bezos sort of bragging to Trump or complaining to Trump what a bad investment the Washington Post was. We resent that as journalists, but like, maybe journalism isn't just about profit making or making, massive amounts of profit. But if there's a segment of the country, I think, that has not stood up for anything other than, I guess, shareholder capitalism, it's CEOs.
If I could say, though, because one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that were it not, and you've said this, were it not for a lot of these tech bros, Donald Trump might not be president of the United States. The way that Elon took over Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that Twitter changed a lot of our conversations, how that helped and elevated Donald Trump in ways that might not have happened were that not the case. And let's also acknowledge the fact that it was Elon Musk who was on a stage with a chainsaw mocking the fact that he had fired all of these people in government, right? Hundreds of thousands of African-American women lost their jobs. So going back to the points we were making earlier, what Donald Trump does is he uses people, right? He's used them for his benefit, and he'll cut them loose. But the problem that I think still exists is they still have a tremendous amount of power to manipulate what we think, how we feel about him, and how we feel about the candidates that are running for office. And so, I just look at this and say he still thinks he's Caesar. As I said earlier in the podcast person, he likes Caesar Rome and not Pope Rome. And he wants to be able to manipulate as many opportunities as possible.
You're being generous, not just Caesar. I want to share, I think we have the soundbite. Maggie Haberman was asked, she had a conversation with Trump about how he views his own power. And I want to share what she said.
He tells this story about how Gary Player introduced him to a historian, and a historian had this theory of the case about Trump. And this paper begins that Donald Trump is the most powerful person who has ever walked the earth, more than Mao, Stalin, Hitler, Napoleon, the Caesars. Yeah, he calls them the top 10. These are the top 10.
Top historian.
10. Yes, and the people who he's naming are the top 10 of sort of the well-known influencers of history, so to speak. And that Trump is more powerful than any of them because he has the might of the U.S. military, because there's social media, because he's got reach. And Trump is just sort of reveling in this. It turned out that this was not a historian. This was Jonathan went down a rabbit hole and tracked him down. We were asking what the name was, David King. He was Gary Player's business associate and caddy.
He was Gary Player's caddy. What do you make of Trump likening himself to Stalin and Hitler?
Look, incredibly dangerous. We are waiting for the Supreme Court of the United States to issue rulings that will decide whether Donald Trump unilaterally makes himself the most powerful American president in American history. The birthright citizenship ruling is about whether the president can, with the signature of a pen, issue an executive order and say, no, this is what a constitutional amendment means. What I say is what it means, not this whole process involving the states and Congress. So this moment, these rulings that are come out, can he take over? Can he fire a Federal Reserve? Can there be an independent agency of experts, the Federal Reserve? Or are they just lackeys to the president? Again, no president's done that. That's one thing. And then can he single-handedly remove legal protections from hundreds of thousands of immigrants that Congress has created? So the stakes here are extraordinary, and that's why I don't mean to be unfair to the CEOs, but I want capitalism, I want profits, but there's other values to our society, such as democracy, the separation of powers, the rule of law, and so I don't think CEOs just get a pass on that.
And let's be clear. When that number continues to drop, Donald Trump's approval rating, those CEOs are going to change their tune, because many, many, many big CEOs right here in New York, bank CEOs who I know, I was starting the show, hey guys, should we come and sit down and talk? Nobody wants to talk right now. They're either working with the president, the lack of regulation is working for them, or they're just scared and they want to be quiet. But when and if the tide turns, I assure you, they will change their tune.